Hello, everyone. This is take two. We've been having some issues with LinkedIn, so I really hope that this is up there and live. But welcome back to Joe and I's next instalment of the Hiring Wake Up Call, the talent pipeline that you'd wish you'd built sooner. We are joined by the incredible Jen Davison today, and we're going to be doing a deep dive on AI. And we were talking before we came online about how the world of D&I inclusion is so vast, we can't all be experts. So when we get the opportunity to bring an expert in to do a real kind of deep dive on their learning, especially around this AI space, I absolutely jumped at the chance. So thank you so much for joining us, Jen. We're really excited to get into this with you.
I'm super excited. I just hope I don't go into nerd town too quickly.
You know what? I mean, everyone will know I'm here for Nerd Town. I absolutely love it. So I think it's fair to say, and Joe, I'll kind of bring you into the conversation as well. I think it's fair to say, right, that AI is here to stay, when it comes to hiring. Lots of organizations have adopted AI, but the conversation itself really kind of feels like it's stuck at the extremes. Okay, it's either, positioned as this kind of solution to, as a solution to bias, or a risk that needs to be avoided entirely. And depending on kind of where you sit, whether you sit in kind of talent acquisition as a candidate going through a hiring process, whether it's someone who kind of sits in the tech team, everyone seems to have an opinion about it, and there seems to be lots of noise. But today really isn't about that hype. It isn't about kind of vendor bashing, right? It's about, where does accountability lie? Where does, the capability and is that in question at all? And what happens when we need something more than technology to, when we're looking at kind of very nuanced hiring. So those are the things we're going to explore today. As always, our comments and questions section is always open. So if anyone is joining us live, and we are successfully streaming on LinkedIn, and we'd love to kind of hear your thoughts as well. So Jen, over to you firstly. Talk to us a little about what it is that you do and how you're helping organizations.
Sure. Thanks, Sally. So I work with organizations in, I suppose, three camps. My background is fairly purist on the kind of EDI side of things. So I've worked in a combination of consultancy and in-house roles, leading EDI strategy for a number of different sectors in-house, and then supporting from kind of the broadest sense, really, across the employee life cycle. The area that I've always been super nerdy about, though, is certainly inclusive hiring. So hence why I'm here today. In terms of how I support organisations in this particular area is everything from kind of ensuring their approach is evidence-based, that we're really thinking about actually how objective is the process, because if the process is objective, guess what? It's also inclusive by design as well. So I kind of have this ethos that inclusion and commercial strategy should sit together. So I take that approach generally when I'm working with organizations. More recently, though, I have found myself in the world of AI ethics. I think it's super exciting, as well as interesting, challenging, all the things. And it's a really important conversation to be having as this is evolving. So very much kind of a partner-led approach, and work with all sorts of organizations across many sectors.
Amazing, fantastic. And Joe, I know this is in your wheelhouse in terms of the conversations that you're having with clients week in, week out. And I think it's fair to say, Joe and I have both worked in recruitment for far too many years than we would care to admit. But the evolution that we've seen in that recruitment space, and now the impact that AI is having, specifically when we're talking about it and looking at it from an inclusion perspective, is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I do think it's fair. I think the conversation from agency world is very different to in-house and employer, though. And it really upset me at the beginning where you said this is not about vendor bashing. I was like, really? I really like doing that because
this is a balanced conversation.
I just believe that there are a lot of them that are just not. They're not under. Maybe they do understand the responsibility, but they're definitely not having the conversation. And especially in agency world where we've got so much power and influence over the talent market. event after event after event that that I go to where we're talking about AI, automation, and recruitment tools, it's all focused on how to apparently create more time for recruiters to do their human job, which I find ironic and hilarious in equal measures. And I just don't hear this word enough around defensible hiring, around fairness, around legal obligations, bias control, decision-making, auditing, all of this stuff that makes AI our absolute friend and can really enhance our inclusive recruitment and representation goals and objectives for TA. And I absolutely love AI. I have woven it into every single training session that I deliver. But I'm teaching recruiters to use it as an inclusion enabler. But I need the support of the vendor community, and for these to be able to support businesses when they're procuring this stuff, to ask the right questions, so that when we do start to see changes in the law and legal obligations, we're not all like panicking and having to make all the changes retrospectively.
So if we, and I appreciate your view on this, Jay, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to it. So I'm setting the tone by saying AI is neither the villain nor the savior, okay? And this is some words that have been kind of pulled out by Jen, kind of coming up with like, what are the things that we're going to be discussing today? And Jen, I also want you to plug your article that you've written on this, because it's absolutely brilliant. But where do you, Jen, firstly kind of sit in that debate around AI as either a solution or a risk?
Yeah, and I think I very much align to this balanced approach on this, because I think the first point is that it's not going anywhere. I think that's the reality check that we all need to just sit with. So whether you feel strongly either way, we need to accept that it's here, that there is some use for AI, and you may be really enthusiastic, or you might hope that it's going to go away and not touch you. But either way, we need to accept it. And I think for me, this is about us thinking about, what does good AI practice look like? How can we be responsible with AI? Typically, I think in terms of framing where we are currently is quite interesting, because it's already out of the box. We are using it in our personal lives. We have, almost like a camp, I would say, who sit in the, I'm really excited, I'm going to start using it for everything, and are pushing internally, perhaps in an organization, to see where all the efficiency benefits are coming from, the productivity benefits are coming from. And that's that kind of push happening over here. We also, though, do have, of course, a camp of a lot of nervousness and fear. And there's a lot of conversation happening about, replacement of jobs, etc., what this means in terms of the future, but also actually perhaps it doesn't apply to me. So these are quite extremes when you think about it. And culturally, that is problematic. So like anything that's new in terms of change, or perhaps something that has some risk attached to it, we just need to think about what our baseline looks like, good kind of governance around it. What are we bringing AI in to do? So it's almost going back to some of the basics around some of this stuff about, actually, before we run, before we can walk type thing. How do we want to put AI into our recruitment practices, and for what purpose? So there's a lot in that question, I think. But I would say, for me, it's less about where do I sit in terms of which camp. I think it's actually just about, it's here. Let's get some good kind of principles and good practice around it.
And I think it's a really interesting view, because where I see this is recruitment has been viewed as a process, right? So from like an automation perspective, of course, you're going to want to drive efficiency. Okay. And I absolutely get that. But I think there is potentially a lack of understanding in the nuance that works within a recruitment process. And if I'm likening it to my old world, which was finance and accountancy, okay, the rules don't necessarily apply. It's not like, there's a chart in terms of if they've got this, do this, if they haven't got that, do that. The data isn't kind of linear, is it? It's very subjective. And it's, you know, what we are seeing as one of the trends that's coming out is that there is some bias kind of baked into that data that then is kind of creating more risk because it's baking that in. So are you able, just kind of from a layman term perspective, and Joe, I'd really like kind of your intel on this as well, from an accessible, equitable hiring perspective, what that is actually doing at scale to recruitment processes in its current form?
Yeah, and it's quite, as you say, in layman's terms, this is half the problem, isn't it? It's so ambiguous how AI works, which in itself is problematic. But in the kind of basic sense, you know, what AI is how it sort of works is that it's using data that we're feeding it. So it's all based on how good is that data, how fair is it? You know, what are we showing is the example we're wanting it to use. AI is also then using that data to find patterns, so things that we may not have even noticed, right? So if we're giving our learning models data that basically says, to be successful in this organization, historically, you've needed to be male. Let's say that. That's at a basic level. That's the data that our AI is looking at. All they're going to do is not only replicate that, but amplify that, because as they're starting to learn that actually by showing us, you know, it's almost like a people-pleasing, you know, machine. What they're trying to do is show us, here's the example, you've taught me that this is what you're looking for, here it is. And the more we reaffirm that and validate that outcome, the bigger the problem becomes. So ultimately, we cannot see AI as like an objective, neutral assessor. What it is replicating our historical bias that we've been trying to dismantle, you know, through our work in DEI for a long time. So actually, it's just learning all the historic problems we have. It's almost like we'd need to build it for utopia, but that's not a reasonable thing we can do either. So it's around, to your point, Sally, this human judgment part, which is actually so massive when we're thinking about using it for any kind of decision making.
Interesting. And, you know, if we then like kind of look at that kind of you know, at a more kind of granular scale, so are we seeing organizations who are adopting, you know, RecTech, Joe, to the term that you coined earlier, are we saying when they are embedding it into their hiring process, they're feeding it with their own data or their own kind of expectations of what a successful candidate or profile looks like? Or are they just taking things off the shelf and going, that will work for us?
I think they're doing a blend of both, and this is where my piece around the, you know, the vendor responsibility. They're not, they a lot of the time they, you know, they don't understand. Most people don't fully understand or can articulate how a decision process goes from A to Z, right? And how decisions get amplified, and, you know, unless you've actually got like audit points in your, you know, in your recruitment technology, so this stuff learns from itself. It learns from us, and then it starts learning from itself, and then it's, you know, it amplifies that decision by 1 billion, and then can't even figure out why it's made that decision in the first place, right? Slight exaggeration with the numbers there, but I think the challenge that I see, we're building on broken foundations. Your average Joe recruiter, recruitment business owner will not have a clue about how the human bias has impacted who gets placed over the last 20 years within their business. They probably won't understand hiring manager hiring habits. They've probably not put a shift to fully understand who gets hired, who doesn't, and the systemic reasons why. So from their perspective, the system isn't broken. So to plug something in that amplifies stuff they're already being massively successful in makes sense. You can, you know, plug this in and you will recruit, you'll identify more of this group, place more of that group, and make more money. But it's about really understanding, well, who, by amplifying what we've already done, which is have this cookie cutter approach to who we make money out of and get placements out of, who's that kind of leaving behind. And also, a lot of the time, we've not done a deep dive audit into our talent attraction, recruitment, hiring, onboarding processes to fully understand one of the most important things in 2026, which is the candidate experience. So we're building it on, I feel, recruiter and TA efficiency without having the seat at the table of the candidate and the candidate journey and how the candidate interacts with it and what those outcomes might be for it. So I do think before we start to think about plugging in AI-led RegTech, which I definitely think we should be doing, I'm not anti this, I just think we need to do a full audit of what it looks like in the moment, who's missing, how it can improve the candidate experience as well as TA and recruiter performance. I just think that piece for me, seems to be missing. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense, because I think one of the questions I was kind of posing whilst I was kind of doing the prep for this session was, is our collective understanding of inclusive hiring mature enough to be able to automate, or mature enough to your point, it's almost we're kind of embedding this on kind of pretty shaky foundations, and are we automating clarity, which I would question that we're probably not at this stage, or are we automating kind of confusion? Jen, you wrote a really interesting piece in your article around, have we defined what good looks like? Can you I'd love you to expand on that. And I would also love you to expand on another point, which is this kind of proxy data. So again, if we're talking about our starting point being utopia, and so can you explain those two concepts? I'm hoping they're kind of linked, but I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on this, because I think it kind of really, what I liked, it was some really kind of tangible examples of, I can see how this now plays out in real life.
And I was just thinking that when we were talking about the tech challenges, actually, because I think this is a sort of real example I can share with you. And again, no vendor bashing, right? But there are lots of solutions out there right now, which all are very shiny and exciting. But I was asked to review one of the solutions. And again, it was about kind of efficiency, driving kind of real sort of candidate experience, because it's quite nice, isn't it, when you're a candidate going through something that's a bit more fun. But aside from that, and what was really interesting was when I talked to the developers, they were basically saying to me that when a client comes to us, we just put in what they give us, right? So they give them the job descriptions or the question bank, whatever it might be. Those solutions, or those kind of startups really, are not equipped to challenge around, is this evidence-based hiring? Have we got we've thought about validity in the assessments we're using? None of that is there. So we're almost starting from a really primitive assessment approach. So that is happening. So to the point around what good looks like, if we go really, again, back to basics, it's around actually, when we're thinking about our criteria, how robust is it? Are we sure that we know how AI is going to assess against that criteria, and how objective is it? When we start to go into assessment that is, largely around human judgment historically, it becomes problematic, as you can imagine. And there's lots of examples of where that's already happening, whether we've used video interviewing for that to judge things like enthusiasm, becomes things around how fast somebody might be speaking, how clear they're speaking. You can see kind of the adverse impact to asking AI to make those judgment calls in a world where they haven't been trained on adjustments, they don't understand disability inclusion, etc. So there's a whole raft around kind of assessment. But to balance that, I would say, if we're sure what good looks like in terms of criteria, and we find an assessment that is actually more like a work sample exercise, it's a yes or no answer. There is no real judgment call. It's a case of, this is efficient because we can, at volume, assess a candidate, whether they've sort of passed this complicated test or not, and we're very clear of what the answer is. Absolutely, what an opportunity. The challenge is we're chucking all of this in together into one, what feels like solution. So that's kind of the first area. I think there's a whole lot there around inclusive assessment and how we're just sort of plugging that AI feature in. To your second question, Sally, around sort of the proxy side, this is really interesting as well, because you might think my earlier example around thinking around gender, and actually, could we not just turn that off? Could you not just say, actually, we don't want to know the gender of our candidates, therefore it's going to be more objective? But because AI is so smart and it is continually learning, what it starts to spot are things like, oh, somebody who has played netball has never succeeded in this organisation before. Or, perhaps this person from this particular postcode, we've never had anybody apply for this role, never mind get through the assessment process. So it learns that even if we switch off our, I suppose, protected characteristics in the process, it can still discriminate through that process. Of course, that should be firing red flags and alarm bells off to all of you who are working, I hope, within the Equality Act. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really enlightening to kind of get those kind of real life examples. I think what I'm seeing, and also, Jo, I want to hear what you're experiencing from your talent acquisition team. So I know that you work with a lot of kind of end recruiters and recruitment teams. So I want to come back to you on that. What I'm seeing, where my role as a recruiter in this space is seeing, is that job specs are being written by AI, right? And I'm assuming then, Jen, to your point, the criteria has then been written by AI. We're then having candidates write their CVs with AI. And now we've also got AI kind of screening them. So what we're actually seeing at the front end of recruitment is the return of the cover letter, right? Which is obviously also being written by AI. But because the volume of applications has grown substantially, because everyone's like, yeah, I'll throw my hat in the ring for that job. So it's actually breaking the recruitment process is being broken by this kind of click to apply button right at the front, in terms of like there's no friction to actually applying for jobs. And then you've got these kind of overinflated or make my CV sound more like this job type activity, which of course you would, because you already think as a candidate you're at a disadvantage. So what was initially intended to drive efficiency is actually having the complete adverse impact. Couple that with, and this is why all this stuff is so blooming complex and nuanced, couple that with the economic situation that we've got playing out, where the pendulum has swung and there's more candidates than there are jobs at the moment, and we are just creating absolute chaos, are we not?
I mean, I feel that we've got an employment market for the first time ever where AI's talking to AI. Somebody said to me the other day, I was at an event, saying that personal brand will not matter. According to some people, personal brand will even be a thing in 2 years, because AI will be selling to AI and there'll be no humans involved. And I was like, I'm not sure about that, because I'm a massive personal brand advocate. But really, when I was listening to you then, I was like, it's the same principle. AI is talking to AI. It's not, there's no human involvement. The human involvement's almost been like taken away. Frictionless hiring, it's causing an absolute nightmare for the people that I'm working with. It's resulting in ridiculous volumes because it's so easy for people to apply for a job, and it's not even a human saying, you know what, Sally, I'm going to throw my hat in for this role. It's bloody apps like Jack and Jill throwing my hat into the, and I do love Jack and Jill, but it's automation that I'm using, but to throw my hat in the ring just because somewhere the platform's decided that I might be a really good fit for it. So they've put an application in while I sleep. I honestly feel that we're going to go full circle. And this is why at the moment I am obsessed in upskilling hiring managers and recruiters to get back to basics on what we did, 25 years ago. But interviewing skills and assessment skills will have never have been so important. Aided and supported, human beings aided and supported by AI to create incredible assessment pieces and real interviews. I think spending time and interviewing properly and being able to fully understand the quality of the question and being able to score it accordingly, and to absolutely fully understand what is it we are hiring for that we need in the next 2 years, to be able to, I think short job descriptions are going to shrink. They only need to be designed for 18 months to 2 years, because what's on there now will be out of date in 2 years' time. I think that, we need to really, really shrink down our deal-breaking critical criterias and really thoroughly understand what it is we're assessing, why we're assessing it, and how we're going to assess the level of answer, so we can tell if it's a load of BS being generated from AI. Those are the skills that I'd want my hiring team to understand. Yeah. And I think I honestly feel we are stood at the edge of the death of the CV and the cover letter, because it has become.
Did it just come back? The cover letter's only just come back, Joe. Can't be the death of the cover letter.
No, it is, because it's worthless. Because it's not. It's AI talking to AI, Sally. It's absolutely worthless. And what do people say? I'll die on this hill, right? And I will do. And I think it will be about incredible platforms that fully work with a hiring manager to understand how to assess somebody's competency or capability at the front end of the recruitment process in a really accessible way without the CV. I'm already seeing platforms like Equitas doing this already and doing it really well. Applied doing it really, really well. Applied's been an Equitas. CVs haven't been part of the assessment process for years, and it will be down to the ability of the hiring manager, in my opinion, which is what I feel has been missed.
So when you take I hear what you're saying, Joe, in terms of kind of how AI can genuinely support inclusion, then Jen, in terms of how would we advise organizations to be able to then predict what success should look like in a role?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's still sort of evolving, isn't it, in terms of the capability of AI? I mean, even just yesterday, there was all the hype around Claude coming in with their HR offering, which is probably something let's just part that. I'll come back to that, because I think that's really interesting just as a conversation topic. But it's changing all the time. I think a lot of the opportunity lies with AI around building on what we know works already. So rather than thinking about actually let's use AI to do some sort of creative mad assessment for us, we need to replicate what we know is inclusive practice and start there. So thinking about the objectivity, the evidence-based approach as we talked about, but also actually keeping an eye on adverse impact. There's the other aspect here about actually just because AI has created an outcome, it's now our role to challenge what that outcome looks like, to keep an eye on it, to monitor it. Actually, what are we going to do? If we see there's adverse impact, who is accountable for that and how do we change it? So there is an element of grace, I think, within limits, of course, but some grace around trying things out, thinking about it through, where is the opportunity around inclusion, as long as we have what we would do in anything we were implementing. Like, let's just check what's the feedback from our candidates going through the process. What have we tested everything for accessibility? Are we sure it's evidence-based? Are we tracking the numbers coming through? And do we need to change anything? So there's some real basic things that we should be doing anyway. I think the challenge with AI is that we almost give it some blind trust, really. We kind of say, it's a computer, it must be objective, it's smarter than we are, we'll just let it do its thing. But I think that's where the problems really lie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've got someone said great session, need to dip out. Thank you, Tracy, it's been lovely to have you. I've lost you all now. Can you hear me and see me still? Yeah, brilliant. Oh, good. I was doing that and I got myself all up together. Anyway, right, here we go, you're back. So then, where does, if we're thinking about this from an organization who has either adopted, and they're like, yeah, we've got it, this is great, or thinking about adopting AI, okay, and we're thinking about ourselves in 2 years' time and thinking, I wish we knew then what we know now, okay, based on where we're at, where does the risk creep in? And where do we need to start really having these conversations now in terms of to future-proof ourselves?
I think the first one is that we're all using it already, right? So, you know, shadow AI, we're all kind of using something side of desk, which may or may not be supporting the overarching aims and governance of the organization we're working for. So I think there's something around actually starting point. I know it's really boring and it's not very sexy, right? We want AI to be really fun. But policy, you know, a bit of a baseline around how we use AI, what we use it for. When we're thinking about recruitment, you know, I think, again, it's coming back to let's map out the journey for both the candidate, the hiring manager, and anyone who's touching that process from an assessor perspective, including agencies and vendors, right? And thinking about where is the human judgment in that process that we've mapped out? What opportunity have we got AI, you know, we can bring AI into? So could it be that mass screening exercise? Could it also be at certain types of assessment? Could it actually be just as a thinking partner or something to challenge us on? So we're really being intentional about how we use AI, because I think actually once you've got an AI that's working for you in terms of, you know, we've trained it on bias-free language, we've trained it on our values, we've trained it on our language and tone, we can use it as something to bounce off of, but it shouldn't be making our judgment calls for us. Okay. So those, I think, are the kind of key starting points. And then not assuming that we're all at the same place. You know, we can't assume everybody understands how to use AI effectively and prompting and all that kind of stuff. So it's also understanding that there is a training need here as well, at least to understand how to override decisions, how to question outcomes, all of that good stuff, I think, is a good starting place, really.
Well, I think that does just pose the question, you know, who owns hiring decisions, or who owns hiring decisions when AI is involved? At what point do we need a human to be making a decision? And also, are we capturing who is being discounted from recruitment processes?
I think, Sally, what we need to do is strengthen that relationship between HR, the people piece, and technology and procurement. I mean, I went to a really interesting conference, HR conference, and the two still sit side by side. Like anybody belonging to the people piece, the human piece, the HRD needs to be hanging out with the head of technology every single day. Those roles are almost, you know, to protect the organization and protect human beings. I think those two roles have to work together, and yeah, they're not standalone anymore. I think that when you said that, what do we need to do? It's almost, I was thinking, well, you need to get Jen in, right, to look at the technology, right, and do the deep dive. Then you need to bring me in to train the hiring managers and the people using it, right? So they actually understand how to do it without technology first, really, really well, really inclusive, really accessible, and really fair, and really legal, and, you know, risk-free. Then you've got like the perfect solution, and then bringing you, Sally, to then do all the senior level recruitment for it. But but I think that the test, the stress test is, if I stopped your hiring manager the following day after an interview and said, talk me through your decision making, yes, they would be able to articulate that. They would be able to give you the answers. They would be able to evidence what they asked, why they asked it, and how that influenced the decision. Even out of the conversation of AI, most hiring managers, I feel, and I'm including me in this as well as a ex-hiring manager, wouldn't be able to ask that, right? So I think that's the stress test for me.
I love that. And I think that segues perfectly onto this kind of next section, because I know that both of you wanted to talk about, you know, what does governance look like in this space? I'm seeing an increase in ethical AI as a topic, as a skill set, as a profession. You know, we're seeing offshoots of kind of, you know, AI and inclusion as subject matter expertise. But talk to me around the governance in this. And I think this probably ties back to the question before, which is like, you know, what do we need to be doing now to ensure that we are robust? We're hearing this term defendable, you know, are our actions defendable, and will they remain defendable I think it's such a hot topic, isn't it? But yeah, from a governance perspective, what guardrails do you think should exist before we are even deploying? And I appreciate we're going to have to backtrack a bit, but before we are deploying this RecTech is going to solve all your problems solution, embedding. What do we need to, what guardrails do we need?
So, I mean, I think there's an important point to make as well, that regulation and legislation, applies here as well. Now, obviously, it depends on your scope, because already, the EU, the AI Act is already in force with more sort of powers coming over the summer. It's a really interesting, I think, act to look at. Again, not the most exciting thing you're ever going to read today, but I think does at least highlight the impact for people and culture teams. It's deemed high risk. Basically, everything that touches people and decision making, that extends into reward as well, processes as you'd imagine, performance management. All of these areas are deemed high risk when it comes to AI. So if you wanted to go full bells and whistles, that's already there. There's already an example of actually what leading legislation is looking like in this space. I think that's worth thinking about. I think the other thing, of course, is the Equality Act, which I mentioned. A lot of the stuff in here is potentially indirect discrimination as well. So we do have obligations already, I think, is one point to make. In terms of governance, though, and what this looks like in practice, for me, this is about really understanding, as we sort of touched on earlier, but policy, practice, people, right? So you've got that kind of baseline of what we're expecting from our people and how it all works, and ensuring that that's written down and in practice. But largely, most of AI ethics frameworks operate within the same principles. And I think there's a real nice direct line between what an ethics framework looks like and what it means in our world of talent and recruitment. Things like, when we're talking about transparency, which is a key principle, how much do we really understand about how the AI is working, right? So we don't need to be software engineers, we don't need to be experts in sort of language models, anything like that. But what we should understand is how the decision making is done, how we override it, how we ensure that the outputs can be challenged. So having that transparency, really important, and will support the trust from our candidates and our around our employer brand as well, which I think is really key. I think the second, there's several, so I'm not going to rattle on through all of them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So
I think the sort of additional one we've touched on a few times is around accountability. So you could argue we're all accountable for this, right? We're all touching it, using it. We've all got a role to play. But as anything that has any risk, our leadership teams, we need them to understand what is being implemented, why it's been implemented, and at what point do they understand where the risk comes in? Because not only is it to individual candidates, but of course, employer brand, and we can go into all sorts of reputational damage, etc. as well. So I think it's understanding actually this should also, as everything does, sit at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. What about from you, Jo?
I think that's really great advice too. I think if I was a business now, I would be looking at the EU acts and just making sure I use that as my benchmark. I mean, I don't know in terms of the timeframes as to when we're going to be starting adopting similar legal frameworks, but we're already, we do follow the EU. We obviously follow the States. There's litigation going on at the moment, isn't there? I think there's 2 big high-profile cases with Workday going on that I think people are paying, the HR world are paying a massive amount of attention to. But we're also seeing this, a real increase in, again, through AI enablement in discrimination claims, unfair dismissal, which is a big one for next year, and litigation, whether that be employee or applicant. And it will only take a few of these cases to see that it was the recruitment technology and the AI that was where the pain point was for the government to I feel bring this in, and I do I do think this is going to be a very quick thing, and it could be very, very costly and quite laborious to to do if you're having to backtrack and go through everything. And so I'd be doing it before, even though there's not enough legislation right now, I'd be working as if there is. So then when it comes in, I've got this, and I don't have to worry about all the stuff that we've done leading up to this point be then coming an issue. And that's not articulated very well, but I know what I mean.
Really, utopia, right? Ideal world. Jen, you wanted to talk about this kind of Claude HR offering. So should we do that before we wrap? What are you're at the front end of this more so than us. So, for anyone who hasn't seen it, what is it? And what do we need, and why do we need to be aware of it?
Yeah, I love Claude. I don't know if anyone else uses Claude, but
everyone's
I'm such a ChatGPT loyalist, right? And it feels like you're sort of, I don't know, like you're cheating or something, like moving into with a new AI. But in a nutshell, it's an alternative to a ChatGPT. But as ever, day by day, there's new offerings, there's new plugins, bolt-ons, everything. Anybody who's used Google Gemini will know that there's all sorts of new integrations there. So I won't go into the technical, but Claude is pretty good because they have got a lot of plugins and an ability to co-work. As part of their new plugin feature, they have human resources. Right. So they have actually built it into the model. Now, you could argue actually largely it's new prompting. It's just a new way of using this, the function. But what's been really interesting is the reaction. So I found all over my LinkedIn yesterday in particular was loads of excitement about efficiency in HR, some concerns about, is this going to replace our job? That type of, conversation was happening, but what a revelation, what a revolution, etc. So I, of course, went, well, I'm going to go and have a little play with this and just see what it comes up with. So I went really simple and asked them to create a job description for me for a CTTO role. What came out? Lovely, right? It looked beautiful, really nicely structured. All the kind of key things were in there, but it didn't take long before you realise that actually the criteria it had within this job description was super flawed. Not only from just like a best practice perspective, but also, of course, inclusion as well. Mm-hmm. So, there was years of experience in there. The language was super masculine coded. There wasn't anything about people and culture. You've got this huge senior role that's going to be transforming the, said organisation with absolutely no people skills needed, apparently. So it was really interesting to see what was kicked out at the other end. Mm-hmm. And whoever follows me on LinkedIn would have seen that. Who also noted that actually I asked Claude, like, have you got is it bias free? Can you qualify this? He's like, no, we haven't written that in. We haven't actually written it into it. So even Claude doesn't think it's inclusive. So I think there's a learning there around actually something that is deemed as this is an HR solution. It has not got best practice and certainly doesn't have inclusive best practice in there. So have a play with it. I think anyone who's listening to this and both of you.
I'm already clicking onto it. I'm sorry.
I know what you're doing. She's in.
Our jobs are safe. That's what you're saying.
Exactly. Oh, hallelujah.
I think, and I just want to thank you both for your time. It's been really interesting having this conversation with you both. For me, I think, the summary is that, it's not, yes, adopt, yes, it's here, but we need to ensure that our hiring systems are sophisticated enough to be able to use it responsibly, and not just from a responsible business perspective, but from a risk mitigation perspective as well. So, if I was going into an organization now and having this conversation, I think I would be starting with that governance conversation. So what does a governance look like, and what does utopia look like here? And how do we then kind of embed that? Where do the gaps appear in terms of hiring manager capability, system interrogation, and the coding of the system that we're using, the vendor that we use, etc., etc. So I think sometimes it's important to try and reverse engineer things as opposed to be one of the early adopters or adopting without kind of this kind of thought and process. And equally, I see a lot of organizations adopting and embedding new tech without the budget to then sustain it from a governance perspective, all that extra work it then creates. Because if you think about how the world of work has evolved over the years, you know, we never used to have like HR data people, did we? We never used to have like, you know, forensic accountants. We never used to have, but I think these are the skill sets that are going to be more prevalent over the next couple of years, in terms of, yes, we're adopting this, but we also need to hire someone who is going to essentially govern and disrupt it and challenge it to ensure that what we're doing is right. So here you go. Maybe there is some hope for us all in terms of what jobs are going to be coming out. But thank you so much, Jen. If you wouldn't mind, you know, or anyone who is watching who wants to get access to Jen's article on this, it's a great read. So please, share the details with us. But yeah, you know where to find us if you need us. Any other kind of parting comments from you both?
Great conversation, brilliant perspective, and I think yeah, it's just thinking about what Jen said, just acting now rather than having to re-engineer everything again. And this could create opportunities for us to get recruitment right and actually upgrade it and it be done properly. I think the human element and the human capability of recruitment has never been so important, in my opinion anyway.
Absolutely. Jen, anything from you?
Yeah, great summary, I think, Jo. Like, I really loved all of the things you just said there, and I think to build on it, I agree. I think this is a real opportunity to get this right and be really responsible, because actually, if we are an organisation that does this well, it means we're credible, we're trustworthy. You know, it all links back into providing a stronger candidate experience and standing out as an employer of choice. And I think actually when we're swamped with everybody doing the same thing, this race to include more sort of AI solutions and then diluting what the journey looks like for a candidate, it's going to impact. And I think there's such low trust in this space as it is. So I think, getting this right there'll be additional benefits we haven't even really seen yet, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you both. And I'm sure we can pick this up again in the future. There's so much that we didn't cover. So, thank you both and see you soon.
Thank you both. It's great.